Hello everyone, welcome to Cloud War and welcome to the third video about the Azure Search AI. So in the last videos we tackled the two most important pieces, the data source and the skill sets. So the data source is going to provide that information that we are going to be processing, and in this case we are going to be working with the blob storage. Then we build the skill set, which is going to be that pipeline that is going to pre-process the documents that we have located into the blob storage. We saw a couple of examples how to create merge skills, OCR skill, language extraction, key phrase extraction, and other ones. So far we have a pipeline with 6 steps that we are going to be using from this demo. Now let's move into the next step where we are going to be creating the indexer and the index. So the first thing that we are going to be doing in today's video is creating the index. And after that we will be able to create the indexer. Once we have everything completed, we will be able to execute our pipeline all together throughout the indexer and get some information and take a look into the Azure portal how the information has been summarized. So we take a sneak peek back into the Azure portal. We have this data source, which is from the Azure Blob Storage, and we also have the skill set that has been created with 6 steps. So now let's move into the next step where we are going to be writing the code to create the index. After that, the indexer. So with that, let's get started. Before writing any code, let's take a look into the indexes into the Azure portal. I would like us to explore this part so we can get a better understanding what we have to do, or we have available throughout the index. So the first thing to clarify is that the index is going to be that entry point that we are going to be able to query using our data structure. So that means the index is going to store all the data that is going to be processed as part of the result of the indexer, which is going to be the next step that we are going to be doing after creating the index. And the index is going to allow us to get that information that has been created via the indexer. So we will be able to query that data, take a look into it, or take a sneak peek into different fields as it is required based on the design that we choose from the skill sets design. So as you can see, you can include multiple columns in order to represent your index. Initially, it's important to mention that you need to provide at least one column that is going to be the ID of your data. So this is going to represent the ID throughout the index. Beyond that, you will be able to add a couple of columns throughout the index based on your requirements. Those columns must be defined according to the data that you extracted throughout the skill sets. So as an example, if you remember, we have the key phrases and also the merge content extract for the skill set side. So we can include columns in order to be able to get that data from the result and be able to query that data as well. The data fields could be of multiple types. You could have things like a string, different type of numbers, date times, geographic types, complex type, and even there is a different support of collections throughout the object. Also, there is some more basic, let's say, number types like single, half, and integer 16 in case you want to save memory into storing this kind of information, which could be crucial when working with indices. The smaller the data, sometimes the easier will be for query that data. Also, important things to take into consideration is that when you create a column, you can specify which operation that columns can be used to. As an example, you can specify if you can actually retrieve that column as part of the query, if that column is going to be filterable, sortable, phase table, or searchable, or is going to specify a specific analyzer or maybe a set of dimensions. Filterable, sortable are actually self-explanatory. Phase table is going to be a very special type of column that you will be able to use as a pre-filter for other information. So let's suppose that you are trying to look up for the search information into a brand of computers. A phase table, it will be a different type of brands like Acer, Sony, and many other ones. So when you click into one of these options, your query is going to be filtering throughout that information. It's pretty usable. And searchable is actually pretty self-explanatory too. So this is a field that you will be able to query and extract information using the filters from your data size. Azure AI also offers a couple of analyzers. The most common is Lucene. We are going to be exploring that in near future videos where we are going to be working with OpenAI and making things a little bit more complex. And the dimension is in case you want to explore your data in multiple dimensions and want to create more complex objects. For today, we are going to be working with the most basic ones. So let's go into the code and start working on that. So the first thing that we need to do in order to start coding our index will be to inject the client. So previously we only injected the indexer client throughout the Azure factory, and this client allows us to create things like data sources, the indexer itself in the next part, and also allow us to create the skill set. In order to work with indexes, we need an additional client in order to interact with that. So the configuration is actually pretty simple. The only thing that we need to change it will be to use the add search index client into the configuration instead of the indexer client. We are going to be using the same URL from the search service, of course. This doesn't change at all. As always, we are going to be using the default credentials for the Azure side in order to use Active Directory. And the most important thing, we need to give a different name to our client. So that way, when we use the factory to extract the code, it's going to be way easier. So with that in hand, let's take a look. So in order to create the index, we are going to be required a couple of things. So as the first part of the video we saw, we need to provide a couple of things. So let's go into the most basic definition. We need to provide the index name and also the search fields that we would like to use. As part of the request, we are going to be including another type of object, which is the create index field. For that, we need to provide the name of the field, the type of the field, as we saw previously. And also we are going to be specifying if it's actually a key, if it's actually searchable or filterable or sortable according to the configuration that we would like to give it. And based on the input information, we are going to be creating the fields that we are going to be using throughout the index and also the index itself. So let's take a look into the client. So now that we have the client created in here, the next thing that we need to do is to iterate over the collection that we have in our request throughout the comments, throughout the fields. So let's do that. The search field actually expects a type of object, which is the collection. So let's define the columns in here. So the search field is going to be a new collection, and the type of collection is going to be search field. This is a special object that comes also with the NuGet package. So now let's iterate the objects that are coming into the request in order to transform those into a search field. So as part of the command, we have the different fields in here. So what we are going to be doing now is iterating over those fields. So now, as part of the processing that we are going to be doing, we are going to be mapping a new search field. So the search field is going to be a new object of the search field. And we are going to be providing a couple of things. The first thing, it will be the ID or the name. So that is part of the request as well. So that will be throughout the field, field name. And as part of the configuration, we need to specify the type. Let's rename this property to make it more sense. Instead of fields, it should be field. And also we are going to be providing the additional configuration to the object. So let's provide, as an example, if it's actually a key, that is part of the request too. And also let's specify it's actually sortable. So for today's example, we are only going to be using those two, but eventually we are going to be working with things like searchable or filterable. So for today, let's build a very basic index throughout the indexer. So now that we have set up our columns in here, we can include that column throughout the object as well. And let's add that result in here. Now that we have everything set up, creating the index is actually pretty simple. Let's create the definition for the index. So the index definition is actually going to be a new search index. The index is going to take at first the name of the index, which is part of the command as well. And as part of the inputs, we need to provide the fields, and of course that is going to be the search fields. Okay, now let's clear the index throughout the client. So I already prepared the search index in here using the Azure Client Factory with a type of object search index client. So all we have to do, it will be to wait for the request in order to add a new index in here. So let's use the create or update index async. And everything that we need to provide, it will be the index definition and also the cancellation token as part of the request. Let's grab the response as well. And let's await for this operation. Now let's send it to part of the response, the index name, just to make sure that everything has been created successfully. Remember, these are a very basic operation. In a more standardized implementation, you would like to handle any errors that the client could throw in case there is a failure trying to create the index. So we are following like a happy path, so take that into consideration. Okay, so now we have our endpoint ready as well, so we'll be able to expose the request throughout the command. So let's take a look how we can make the request properly throughout Swagger in order to create the fields that we would like to have. Now our endpoint is being executed. Let's take a look into the request. So for the index creation, we need to provide two things, the index name and of course the fields that we would like to process. So for the index name, we are going to be using the blob index name. And for the other parameters, let's take a look. What we need to provide for the fields, it will be a file name, field type, is key, is searchable, is filterable, and is sortable. The first one that we need to provide, it will be the ID, which is going to be of type of a string. Take a look into this parameter because the data type is actually key sensitive. So if you write a string in lowercase, it's not going to work. We are going to specify indeed as this column is a key. It is not going to be searchable or filterable either, but it's going to be sortable. For the other columns, we are going to have things like the content, which already we extracted throughout the data mining in the skill sets eventually. The field type is going to be also the type of a string. It's not going to be a key, and it's not going to be searchable, filterable, or sortable either. Very similar, we are going to be extracting the language code, which we extracted using the language detection skill set, with the same configuration as the previous one. Here it comes to that are pretty important: the key phrases and organization. So if you remember, we use as particular skill sets in order to extract the key phrases and save that output. There is something in particular about these two, is that they are going to be of type of collection and also of type of a string. So when working with arrays, make sure to specify the collection type and also the subtype of the collection. In this case, it's a string for both of them. They are going to be everything set to false as well. So now with the basic configuration, make a request to create our index. Okay, we got as part of the response the index name. So let's take a look into the Azure portal if everything has been created successfully. Now that we have our blob indexing here, we are ready to move to the next step, where we are going to be doing the setup of the indexer. So for the indexer, we can also take a look into the Azure portal to grasp an idea that we need to provide. So the first thing that we will need to provide for the creation, it will be an index and also a data source and also a skill set. As you can see, the indexer is going to be that factory or that center point that is going to integrate everything together. So let's take a look into the theory to try to understand more easily what we are going to be having here. So the indexer is going to work throughout different steps, which is going to be the first one, the document cracking. This will be the step where the indexer travels or crawls throughout the files or the columns or the different data types that have been specified throughout the input and start cracking those files, getting the information. After that, it's create field mappings for those documents according to the type. As an example, the document cracking is going to identify if actually your files are text or maybe images. As soon as the skill set have that ready throughout the indexer, the data is going to be sent to the skill set execution. So the skill set is going to extract all the valuable information for the documents that have been prepared by the indexer throughout the initial steps. After that, if you remember, the skill set provides outputs according to the data that has been pre-processed, and that output is actually the information that is going to be meaningful to be queried, and that information is going to be pushed into the index. So at the end, everything is going to be throughout the index and is going to be queried throughout that place. So now with that in hand, there are a couple of extra configurations that we can have in mind, like we can specify which type of files we would like to include or exclude for the pre-processing. This is pretty helpful for the blob storage, of course. And there are different types of operations that we can choose as an example for the data extraction. We can grab all the information for the file itself, all the metadata, or query only the content and the metadata. So that will depend on the requirements. In today's example, we are going to be extracting information from the content and the metadata that is going to be processed by the skill set. The parsing mode is actually a different ways where you can pre-process your data using different types of objects. Of course, as you might already be guessing, the most default will be JSON. The image action, as the name says, is what to do when we find images in the documents. In this case, we have the generate normalized images or images per page. The most standard one will be to generate normalized images by default, so we are going to be using that one. So this is going to take any images from the input folder and is going to send those into the generalized image and normalized images in the document folder. We can also allow the skill set to read the metadata in case we would like to have that. And in case the PDF, you would like to have a technique to rotate the PDF itself in order to extract information from different angles, you can use an algorithm here too. In the indexer cache, we can enable the enrichment too, but there is a more advanced option that we are going to be talking in later videos. Okay, so now that we understand what we need to provide in order to create an indexer, let's do it throughout the code. So now let's map the configuration what we saw a moment ago here in the code. So now that we have the search indexer in here throughout the indexer feature, the first thing that we need to provide it will be a configuration for the parameters. So for that, we are going to be specifying the indexing parameters objects, and we are going to be using a new class of index and parameter that also comes from the NuGet package. And let's provide some basic configuration. The two things that I would like us to provide in here as bus of the configuration, it will be the max file items and also the max file items per batch. We are going to be sending that information throughout the request. So let's add that very quickly. And also let's batch this one. So request.command max file items per batch. So those two parameters actually have something very common, is that this is going to tell the skill set pipeline what is the tolerance in failures. So let's suppose that you are pre-processing 2000 files. You can specify the indexing parameter that from those 2000 files you will be able to tolerate like 10, 20 or 50 files that fail throughout the pre-processing. And also you can specify for each one of the batch that is going to be pre-processed by the indexer how many files are you able to tolerate as a failure. This is actually pretty helpful, especially when you have bigger data sets where maybe you would like to skip a couple of files that maybe will fail, but it doesn't mean that the whole process has to fail. Or quite the contrary, if a big percentage or representative of the data fails, you might want to stop the process and take a look what is happening in the data that is being processed. With that in hand, then the second piece that we need to provide throughout the indexing parameter, it will be the configuration. So for that, we have two things. We are going to be providing, as we saw in the Azure portal, an operation for the data to extract and also for the image action. In this case, for the data to extract, we are going to be extracting the content and the metadata that is being processed by the skill set. And for the image action, we are going to be sending everything to the generate normalized images. So we are going to be normalizing the images before sending those throughout the skill set. Now creating the indexer is actually pretty simple. For that, we are going to be creating a new instance of search indexer, and we need to provide initially the name of the indexer that we would like to create, and the second part, it will be the data source. So here it comes this important moment where we start connecting everything. So for that, we are going to be sending the data source name. And now the last parameter, it will be the name of the index that we would like to tag together with this indexer. So in this case, let's use the index name. As a couple of additional properties, we need to provide, or we can provide things like the description and also the skill set. So let's start with the description. Now let's provide the skill set name, which of course is pretty important. The skill set name is going to be the final piece that we need to tag together in here. And this is going to be, of course, as the name saying, the skill set that is going to be used for the indexer in order to prepare the data. Let's specify this is not going to be disabled just in case. And part of the parameters, of course, we are going to be using the indexing parameters that we just created. Now we need to provide a couple of things, which is going to be the field mapping that we would like to extract when the indexer executes. Of course, since the indexer is going to connect directly to the index, we need to map the fields that we are going to be pre-processing. So remember, the indexer is going to pre-process all the data using the skill set, and after that is going to output that information to the index. So of course, we need to tell to the indexer which type of columns we would like to process. So for start with that, we need to create a field mapping function, and the first thing that we will need to provide it will be the type of encoding. In this case, base64 is actually pretty helpful because we are going to be working with content that might have a special character or unwanted characters that maybe other preprocessors are going to be finding very challenging to process. So for the field mapping function, we are going to use base64 in order to encode all the information. Now we need to map all the information that comes from the skill set directly into the indexer. So also using the mapping function, we can provide the basic information. So the indexer is going to contain the field mappings, and for the field mapping, we need to provide the type of mapping that we would like to use. Let's take very quickly a look at this example. So one of the outputs that are going to be created is going to be the metadata storage path. So this is going to be the ID of our object, and also we are going to be using the mapping function to process the data. So this initial part is going to be the ID or the query that we would like to be used as part of the main column for each one of our data in the index. So this is, in this case, is going to be the path for the file into the blob storage. Additionally to that, we could have the content as well, which we are already extracting throughout the skill sets, and also we will have the other ones that we saw throughout the index creation. So we will be adding a output mapping, for the organization, and also for the key phrases, and also for the language code. So these output fields, it will be the ones that are going to be taken into account from the skill set. So one of the important things to mention in here is that some of the field mappings are actually mappings directly throughout the content that is being generated, and these columns are actually going to be created from the output fields that are being created by the skill set itself, like the organization, the key phrases, and the language code. Now that we have everything set up, all we have to do, as always, it will be made to make a request to our client using once more the most basic operation. In this case, we are going to be using the search indexer client, and we are going to make a request in order to create or update our indexer. All we need to pass it will be the indexer and also the cancellation token, as we did previously. Beyond that, let's make sure that we return throughout the response the value and the name, and that should be everything. Here is going to happen something pretty important. We are going to make the request using the Swagger page as previously, but after that we are going to be moving pretty quickly to the Azure portal to see the skill set, and everything is working together in the indexer, and the data is start to being processed. So let's take a look. Now in the Swagger page we can execute the creation of the indexer. So for the name we are going to be using the blob indexer. We are providing a basic description in here, but the most important piece is coming here into place. So for the data source name, make sure that you specify exactly the same name that you use in the Azure portal. So for that we will have this one. The same is going to apply for the indexes and also for the skill sets. Make sure that you provide exactly the same name according to the names that you use. Besides that, for the max failed items and failed items per batch, we are going to provide a -1. So this is going to say that we are going to be allowing any failures. We are not going to pay any attention to that. But remember, in a more real case scenario, you would like maybe to set up a proper threshold just to make sure that the amount of data that is being processed is actually meaningful for the case that you are working for. So let's execute the request very quickly, and this should return the name of the indexer after the request has been done. Now with the response, we can go to the Azure portal and explore the indexers. The first thing that we are going to notice is that the indexer has been created, and most importantly is going to say that the operation is actually in progress. So what is happening right now, since we created the indexer is doing everything. It's cracking the documents, it's creating the most basic metadata for both documents and images, as we explained previously, and that information is going to be sent throughout the skill set, which are going to extract the valuable information. Once the information has been extracted by the skill set, the indexer is going to map the outputs of the results into the index itself. So based on the amount of files that you are pre-processing, they might take a little bit longer or shorter, but since we already have just a JSON file, an image, and a very short PDF with only 8 pages, this actually takes a few seconds. So we already can see that 3 of our documents have been successfully created. So if we take a look into the index, we are going to be seeing the columns and also all the information that we extracted from the document. So in here, in the index, we see that we have all the fields that we specified during the request, and everything is set up as we requested to. And now let's go into the Search Explorer. Now let's click into the search field, which is going to give us back all the information that has been extracted. So let's take a look. So as part of the ID, we have the document or the URL into the blob storage, which is actually has been encoded as base 64 as we specified during the configuration. And in this case, we can take a look that we have been extracted all the information related to one of the documents, which is actually based on NVIDIA and some of the configuration. So this was from the screenshot that we have previously. And the screenshot that we have for the image is actually going to be working with the OCR in order to extract some of the most basic information and also some of the organization. If we take a look into the second image, it's going to be the chapter in a PDF, and this extracted also the key phrases throughout the document, which is actually more extensive because this document is of course way bigger than the other files. And also it's going to identify the same things, any organizations throughout the document, or persons or something similar. And for the final one, it will be the JSON file, which is actually the content that we created in here. And also based on the JSON, extracted all the key phrases from it, and also the possible organization that have been mentioned throughout the document. So as you can see, building a whole pipeline in Azure Search AI in order to mine data from files and extract that information is pretty simple. So on the next video, I will be preparing a more complex scenario with more data, or let's call it more meaningful data. We are going to be joining the Azure AI result with OpenAI. With OpenAI on Azure, we are going to be creating a smarter application, which is going to be querying data for the Azure AI and providing more meaningful outputs based on the information that has been queried on the Azure Search Index. So join me on that video. It's going to be very fun. See you there.